So again, thank you and welcome back. So today, Craig will be offering a Dharma talk on an element of the Noble Eightfold Path, right view. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, everybody. I have a gatha I want to offer. The Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered, even in hundreds of millions of ages. Now we see this, hear this, receive this, maintain this. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. And I have one other I'd like to offer. The one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. So thank you for all being here today. I apologize for my late entrance. Oftentimes I think in showbiz they say, there's one thing that's going to go wrong with your performance. Well, I got that out of the way already. So again, apologize for being late. So right view, samadhi, is what I'm talking about. I just want to start by saying what I hope to convey. I'm going to share my screen. Share that screen. So I imagine that everybody has some familiarity with the matrix, but this is my hope of what I'm going to convey here is samadhi is basically the truth. So the matrix reference, Neo and others were living in a fantasy world, computer-generated simulation of reality. And he had the opportunity to wake up and be aware of the real, or to learn the truth. And his choice was to take the red pill and do that, or take the blue pill and go back to where he was. So similarly, we have that same choice. And right view is fundamental, or is a necessary component of taking that step. So in thinking about this talk, so we have, as you all probably know, the Connecticut DTO is trying to make an emphasis this year on how to convey the Dharma, how to do a good Dharma talk, just because we all, to some degree, feel inadequate to the task. I know that I suffer from imposter syndrome and all of, stage fright and all of those things. So how do you get past that? This is an attempt to take some steps to understand what the impediments are and how to get past them. So one of those things is, who am I to give this talk? Well, who am I is a koan, which basically all the answer is no, I'm not that. No, I'm not that. So I can't really answer the koan, but what I can do is respond to it with, beings are numberless, I vow to save them all. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. So with that in mind, I am here. So we had the signups went out for this, and people signed up, and I was pleased to see that right view wasn't claimed by somebody early on. So I was glad to take it because it is, as I said, foundational. And the best way to learn something is to teach it. So Joseph Joubert said, to teach is to learn twice. And then in my personal history, one of my college professors said, to learn something well, teach it. So learning to be able to teach others forces you to understand more deeply. In the past week or so, I've been pretty much whole on just thinking about right view. Not that I have any particular insight into it, but it is flowing through me now, and I understand a little bit better that it is really everything. But you could also argue that all of the components in the Eightfold Path are everything, since they all kind of interrelate. What I would like to, and the other reason I wanted to do this, aside from becoming more familiar with the material, is to focus on the teaching. And to that end, I would like to ask of you two favors. One is to listen with a critical ear, just what's good in this talk, what's bad in this talk, how could it be better. What we want to do is, after the these 7 practices or 8 practices are done, have kind of a case history of how do you give a Dharma talk from the inside point of view. So I'm going to write something, other people will write something, and in the future Dharma teachers can look at this and say, yeah, they had the same misgiving, and this is how they felt about it, this is how they dealt with it. So if you could listen with a critical ear, and then after this is over, we'll send out an email with a survey, questions, kind of open-ended, but you can offer those then, so that can be part of what we pass on to others. The other thing I'd like to request is we're trying to do an echo, as we've been calling it. Last year, in one of our books, Awake at Bedside, Norman Fisher had a suggestion that at the end of a talk, just so the presenter can kind of get feedback on what came across, because they know what they said, but they don't know how it came across. So in order to do that, 1 or 2 people just repeat back just 1 or 2 minutes, or maybe they do it jointly. What were the points that came across, like the Dharma points that came across in this talk? So I'd like to ask 1 or 2 people to do that at the beginning of our discussion. So that's it for my preliminaries. Where does right view fit in to the big picture? So we have the foundational teaching of the Four Noble Truths. In the Mahayana tradition, they show how we can live in the everyday world, and they are the truth, the cause, the end, and the path. Interestingly, they're all 4 nouns. They're all things that are. The last of them is the path, points to the Noble Eightfold Path, and in turn, the Noble Eightfold Path, especially in right view, points back at the correct understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So it is, they do reference each other. The Noble Eightfold Path can easily be thought of as 4 verbs, or as 8 verbs. Well, the Four Noble Truths are 4 nouns. So speaking correctly, acting correctly, earning your livelihood correctly, making the right effort, practicing right mindfulness and right concentration, having the right resolve, and right viewing. The term right is the translation, the Pali term is sama. And sama is commonly thought of as being properly, rightly, thoroughly, but it also means to go along with, or to unite, or to go together with. So this kind of fits with the obvious realization that these elements all interbe to form a whole. And the Noble Eightfold Path implies movement. These are things that we continually do, and they all work together to form a way of living. The way they're grouped, we have the moral group, the meditation group, and the wisdom group. So living harmoniously with others is the moral group. Training the mind to develop clarity and insight into the nature of reality is the function of the meditation group. And then the wisdom group is the understanding why this path should be followed, and realizing wisdom as the culminating insight. The order, we're in our DTO effort this year, we're going from right view as the first thing. So we're doing the insight group first. When viewed as 8 factors, that's the normal way of looking at it, because view is primary. because it is required to understand why the path should be followed. When viewed as the three divisions of moral, meditation, and insight, it's usually in the order shown on this chart, where the moral is first, because that is virtuous living. That is our person's interaction with their community, their society. So that's fundamental, and then through samadhi we achieve culminating insight. So that's kind of an explanation of why you see them in different orders like that. So that's where right view fits into the overall picture. So then the question is, what is a view? Where do views come from? What is right view? And how does that differ from ordinary views? So ditthi is view. Samaditthi, as we said, is right view or united view. Mika ditthi is the opposite of that. Generally, so ditthi in Pali means view, and most often, unless it's accompanied by sama, it means wrong view. So mika ditthi is specifically wrong view. The idea of that is that, well, the Yogacara, just let me go back. The Yogacara school posits that the obvious observation that all of our perceptions, everything we know about the world, happens within our mind. Then this is, over time, the experience of our perceptions create mental formations, which then coalesce into views. This is the way it works. This is the way it has to work, because there's so much going on in the world, and we can only focus on this piece at a time, this piece at a time, and you have to kind of form abstractions, form patterns, and this is, we wouldn't be able to function. We would just be overwhelmed. So this is necessary to form views. But what the problem is, we can easily mistake these views for something that for them being more than what they actually are. And we can become bound by them, defined by them, cling to them. And that's why views are more often than not inherently dangerous, but actually completely necessary too. So that's the challenge, as to how to balance those things. So about right view. Joseph Goldstein, one of the podcasts I listened to of his recently, had a nice story explaining the need for right view. So if we're on a journey and we're going in the right direction and we keep going, no matter how long and difficult it is, if we keep going and we're going in the right direction, we will get there. If we don't have the right direction, even with the strongest aspiration and the greatest efforts, we may be wandering all of our life. Right view is fundamental to all aspects of our paths. A number of years ago, this is going to sound a little like Huineng, but a number of years ago, I heard or read a portion of the Diamond Sutra where it basically said, abiding nowhere, let the mind arise, and was really struck by that. Just the fact that is profound and obviously true when you think about it. But the implications of that are, you're the guy that just jumped out of the airplane, and the bad news is you don't have a parachute on. So it's like that. You need something to stand on. What do you do? Well, that's a good question. What do you do? The end of the story about the guy jumping out of the airplane is, well, he didn't have a parachute. He realized that there was no ground. So we have views, we have right view, and then the question is, why is this difficult? Why don't we just see things as they are that would relieve suffering? Why is that? And the answer to why right view isn't obvious is that the deck is stacked against us. We have approximately 3.7 billion years worth of natural selection where where the primary measure of success for that organism was whether you lived long enough to pass on your genes. Suffering wasn't particularly relevant. A number of us a couple of years ago read this book, the Why Buddhism is True. And Robert Wright, among other things, wears the hat of an evolutionary psychologist along the way. So we read the book together, and he actually was presenting in the area or gave a talk in the area, so we went to see him speak. But it is just obviously true when you think about it, that this is what we are. I mean, we are evolved animals, and what, the mechanisms that allowed us to get to this point, they don't care whether we're happy, just whether we're successful in this term. And it's interestingly, it's easy to see this feature in other animals, but we tend to not want to think of ourselves that way. We don't want to realize that we're almost completely governed by subconscious reactions, which then we retroactively fit rationales to. And there have been a lot of recent studies, or a lot of old studies with this, like with split brain personalities, where they could measure, because of the odd circumstances, put somebody in some strange situation that is artificial, but they don't realize it, and they come up with a perfectly reasonable to them explanation for why this is the case. But even recently, with fMRI type studies, you can the decisions are made, and then after the fact you decide, well, this is why I did it. So we are this way. So it's obvious. I mean, so that's why right view is not, doesn't jump out as our first response to things. A number of years ago, I came across a poem. So we all know the temptation of Mara coming in on the eve of Buddha's enlightenment, where he tempted him with different things. I came across this poem by Alexander Pope, 18th century poet, Essay on Man, Epistle 2, which describes the wealth of personalities that constitute themselves. And this is basically, Mara, all arising. All of these personas in the past have had valid purposes, but they don't necessarily serve a useful purpose now. Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man, placed on this isthmus of a middle state, a being darkly wise and rudely great, with too much knowledge for the skeptic's side, with too much weakness for the stoic's pride. He hangs between, in doubt to act or rest, in doubt to deem himself a god or beast, in doubt his mind or body to prefer. Born but to die, and reasoning but to err, alike in ignorance his reason such, whether he thinks too little or too much. Chaos of thought and passion all confused, still by himself abused or disabused, created half to rise and half to fall. Great Lord of all things, yet a prey to all. Sole judge of truth in endless error hurled, the glory, jest, and riddle of the world. That last line shouldn't be there. That was removed and reappeared. The last thing I want to say about why right view is not obvious is kind of a funny aside. It's a quote from a book, a science fiction book, in fact, by John Burdett, called Bangkok Tattoo, which doesn't really matter. He's a Buddhist private investigator, but he gives this summation of people. You see, dear reader, speaking frankly, without any intention to offend, you are a ramshackle collection of coincidences, held together by a desperate and irrational clinging. There is no center at all. Everything depends on everything else. Your body depends on the environment. Your thoughts depend on whatever junk floats in from the media. Your emotions are largely from the reptilian end of your DNA. Your intellect is a chemical computer that can't add up a zillionth as fast as a pocket calculator, and even your best side is a superficial piece of social programming that will fall apart just as soon as your spouse leaves with the kids and the money in the joint account, or the economy starts to fail and you get the sack, or you get conscripted into some idiot's war, or they give you the news about your brain tumor. To name this amorphous morass of self-pity, vanity, and despair self is not only the height of hubris, it is also proof, if any were needed, that we are above all a delusional species. Somewhat cutting, but hard to argue with. So, enough of why it's hard. What is right view? Samaditi. Right view is not really a view, it's a meta view. So right view is a view of views. It's the view that leads to wholesome results, and most significantly, it is pragmatically determined. It is pragmatically determined. So what it is a view that contributes to the elimination of suffering. That's the pragmatic component of it. It's not moralistic or dogmatic, but simply what leads to the end of suffering. Underlying right view is the admonition to always inquire why we think what we think, to examine our views. Because as I said before, we have to have views. I mean, we couldn't function without the views. But we have to be aware of them. So, well, it isn't a guiding theory. It isn't a guiding theory, but it is a transformation of perception resulting from living the Dharma. One comes to see things in a manner by which we don't become attached. Samaditi is perfected vision. So that's what it is. How do you actually practice it? When you practice it, what occurs? Everything that you encounter is your life. This is it right here, right now. This is your life. You experience your personal mind and its activity, but you experience it with universal awareness. So in answer to the Diamond Sutra's abiding nowhere admonition, you abide in the meta viewpoint of right view. You take your Buddhist vows and your understanding as the ground on which you stand. It is using these ideas and dancing with the present moment as it is. You grasp at nothing, including enlightenment, or perhaps even especially enlightenment, nor do you merge with oneness, nor do you alternate between the two. Instead, you experience the attempts of grasping while you are intimate with the Absolute. Suzuki Roshi in Zen Mind Beginner's Mind had this quote: "The self is the door that swings open and closed with each breath. The breath is not yours, it is the universe's breath." An interesting practice that came up in the reading was how do you avoid habitual responses to things, letting a view take over. And basically you do three things. You say, what is this? What just happened? What's next? So what is this? What is this feeling that has arisen in me? So recognizing it. What just happened? So you look, where did this come from? What events led to this? And an interesting point to make on this is you're not going to look back to in the fourth grade, Bobby hit me and pushed me down, or my mother was mean to me, or whatever. That's the field for. I mean, that's for a different time to do that type of analysis. This is what were the immediate proximate events that led to this? Why? What triggered this? And then what's next? Grounded in right view, we formulate an appropriate response. So the views are there, and you're using them, but they're not leading you. So that's how things look, kind of, perhaps, when you are right viewing things with perfected vision. So, how do you do it? There are some guidelines. This is the 3 Dharma seals, in case you didn't recognize it. A number of years ago, I did a presentation, and I didn't take this picture, but I did caption it, and I thought it was actually pretty funny. The fundamental characteristic, the 3 Dharma seals. So see these things in all things. The short, I mean, we're going to go through 6 different items that are guidelines for how to let right view arise, the meta view of right view arise. But the short answer is basically view things with in a manner that reduces suffering, bearing in mind the truth, the realized truth. I mean, you know this within yourself of the Four Noble Truths, that this is true, and right view. You're just bearing that in mind in all things. The long answer is use the 3 Dharma seals. So impermanence. This is what allows transformation to be possible. Everything changes. Non-self. We are made of everything else. And nirvana, which is the inverse of dukkha. So nirvana is, I think Thich Nhat Hanh, maybe others started doing this also, but instead of referring to things as dukkha as being a fundamental characteristic of things, Thich Nhat Hanh felt that dukkha was not necessarily a fundamental characteristic. I mean, it wasn't present in all things. It didn't have to be present in all things, because it was a choice that we make. And with corrected viewing, we would not experience dukkha. So conversely then, nirvana is something that is present in all things. And so he chooses to use that instead of dukkha. The silencing of all concepts includes the 8 concepts of birth, death, permanence, dissolution, coming, going, one and many. It also includes the silencing of their opposites. Nirvana is not something to find later. As a Dharma seal, it's present in all the teachings and in all that we experience. The other set of guidelines are the 3 doors of liberation, the 3 concentrations. The analogy of a wave is so appropriate to so many things that we talk about, but especially so here. So anyway, the 3 concentrations consist of emptiness, where there is no independent self in anything. Everything is made of everything else. This is because that is. Signlessness. Wherever there is a sign, there is deception, illusion. The Tao Te Ching also has something similar. One of the verses in there, I can't quote it exactly, but the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. So as soon as you name it and put a label on it, it ceases to be. It becomes that label instead. And then last one, aimlessness. There is nothing to attain. So we're already there. So most of what I gleaned for this talk were from a variety of podcasts, a couple of books, things like that. But the sutras also have a lot to say on it, on the subject. Oh. Whoa. I'm sorry. My slides got out of order. No? All right, this is the second problem for this, this presentation. I don't have the right slide deck. So I'll just share my notes. So in the I will not necessarily attempt to pronounce this or not correctly, Akanyagata Sutta. To what extent is the right view? People normally see the world in terms of a polarity of existence and non-existence. Right view is not bound to attachments. Right view avoids the two extremes of everything exists and everything doesn't exist. And it understands that suffering arises or ceases depending on the 12 links of independent causation. I'm revealing all of my notes here. So again, the 12 links of independent causation, starting with ignorance, going up to aging and death. The other sutra that's commonly mentioned is the Samaditi Sutra, which is aptly named for right view. Thinasara Bhikkhu has a translation which is a very lucid explanation. So Sariputra in the sutra expands on the Four Noble Truths, focusing on the idea of skillful and unskillful actions, and then the concept of nutriments. So, as you would suspect, we foster the skillful, and we take in the correct sort of nutriments. He also then expands on them by working backwards through dependent causation. And interestingly, he notes that when you're looking at the 12 steps of causation, you just look between two different things, and you can infer from that enough, so you can provides enough discernment to abandon unskillful observation and put an end to suffering. And then the other thing he did was going back to the beginning, to ignorance. The source of ignorance he termed to be mental fermentation. And since these fermentations depend on ignorance, with the application of skillful action and the correct use of nutriments, ignorance can be brought to an end. So, sorry for my second goof there. Somewhere in my deck I have all of that written out a little more prettily. But concluding, right view is just this, to dance gracefully between the principle and the persona. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.